Good afternoon. My name is Mr. Wachilla, and I'll be your instructor for History 111, U.S. History Pre-Civil War. If you want to take a look on the screen, you'll notice that this is the introduction page. This is where you'll see any kind of announcements that I have, as well as any activities that I might post, updates, as well as what's probably most important is upcoming events. So the whole point of this video is to show you how to access the different content throughout this course. So if you go ahead and hit content at the top of your screen, it will give you a nice little background of everything that you're going to be doing. So to start off, you'll notice that I've included an overview about the course. Specifically, I start off just talking about myself and how I became a teacher, how I got to where I am today. And then I included some important information such as my office number, my cell phone number, and my email, which are the two best ways to contact me. You can either call me or text me, whatever's most convenient for you, and I'm usually able to get back to you as soon as I can, which is usually pretty quick. And also include a little picture of myself. I was at a Civil War museum up in Harrisburg when that picture was taken. So let's take a look at what's next. So if I go to table of contents, it's going to give me everything that's in this course. So to begin, you'll see that I got one of my favorite presidents, a quote from him, Abraham Lincoln. I will prepare, and someday my chance will come. So he's got a lot of good quotes. So I included the different standards or the different things that I want you to be able to get out of this class on this page. A lot of it has to do with social studies, is what I'll say a lot of times in this course, thinking like a historian. So when we study social studies, specifically history, it's a lot of understanding primary sources, secondary sources, as well as credibility. So throughout this course, I really try and use history and different historical events and places and people as ways to practice our ability to identify credibility, as well as what sources to use when analyzing historical events. So as I scroll down, I love using memes, so you'll see I use a lot of memes. I got the syllabus, as well as like the course schedule, the meet your instructor, the expectations, as well as discussion boards. I have one discussion board that everyone should be using, kind of like a break the ice discussion board, as well as questions, comments, and collaboration, which I think is important so that students can reach out to each other and work together. So as I continue moving along, under course orientation and resources, I have the course design matrix, which is what we created for this for the course Del Tech. So going to the modules. So the first module really focuses on students understanding that we have different perspectives. Every single person in the world has a different perspective. Depends on where you come from, what you were exposed to growing up, what your religion is, gender, and many other factors that contribute to us looking at the world around us differently than people who are similar or very different than us. So to begin this module off, students will begin reading the textbook. The second part is really understanding the power of acknowledging that people think differently, which is why I provided that first video for students. Then the second link starts to dive into why it's important to think like a historian. What does it mean to think historically? How can we put our shoes or put ourselves in the shoes of the people that lived at the time that we're studying? As students continue to progress through this module, they then begin learning the difference between primary and secondary sources. One thing I really try and stress to my students is that one's not better than the other necessarily, even though primary is probably better. But when I say that primary sources are better, a lot of times students start to think, well, secondary must just not be that good, which is a very common misconception that I see a lot. So the first assignment that the students have to complete is they have to kind of discuss what are some contributing factors that shape a person's perspective. As I spoke about that earlier, that could be depending on where you live. That could be depending on past experiences, what people around you say, who your friends are, who your parents are, excuse me, where you grew up. And then this module ends with a quiz on primary and secondary sources. So if I go to this, I will show you a little bit of the quiz that I made. So I'm going to preview it for us. what you'll see is that students are expected to identify whether a source is primary or secondary. So, for example, the first one is Alexander Hamilton biography a primary or secondary source? So, to avoid students being able just to say, "Oh, it's primary and that's it," I always try and have them do an extra step. In this situation, it would be providing reasoning for your choice. So, I think Alexander Hamilton biography is primary because, or is secondary source because, and that's really where we start to hit on those higher level learning questions, right? Not something where they can't just kind of guess and go through. You'll notice that I only created like 6 questions for that, but I would definitely expand it to as many or as little as I wanted. And I would probably provide students with these examples ahead of time just so that they would kind of have an idea going into it. And the truth is you could really make this into where students create their own examples, and then you could use that to make a quiz out of. So there's a lot of different things you can do when studying primary and secondary sources. So the real main goal behind learning between primary and secondary is how we can use those sources to help us understand things that happen in the past. So as we begin to move to the second module, this is really where we start to get into the content heavy part of this whole project, this whole course. And so I thought beginning pre-Civil War, it would be important to understand how the United States began from 13 colonies and how we eventually grew into the country we are today. So for the first module, I have students continue to read the textbook as well as visit a few different websites that I have identified. The first website is really gets them to understand what it was like to live in the United States at this time. What was it like? What were the difficult and what were the benefits? Why would they do this? Because for a lot of these people, coming to the United States was a very risky thing, very dangerous thing. So why do these people decide to leave where they're born, where they grew up, where their family is, to a place of unknown? So that's really what I want my students to dig into at that point. And then they eventually move into more concrete background information for each colony. It's important to acknowledge that these colonies were different. They had different people from different countries, from different cultures, from different backgrounds, who had different beliefs. Their reasoning behind making this voyage to the New World was different. Maybe it was to avoid religious prosecution. Maybe it was just to find a better life. Maybe it was for financial benefit. So the students really begin to dig into that in the background information. One thing that I really love using, and I think it's a very useful resource, is Quizlet. So I provided a Quizlet link to them so that they can really start to focus on some of the important vocabulary that they'll need to be familiar with as they continue this course. The big major assignment for this module is where each student will choose one of the original colonies. Now, they will then perform research as well as create some kind of way to present their research. Maybe it's a PowerPoint or a Weebly web page or a report or however they want to do it. It's nice to give students an option to be creative as well as give them a little bit of freedom, creativity freedom for them to really get the most out of what they're trying to say and what the information they're trying to present. So moving on to the third and final module. So the second module focused on the beginnings of the United States and how we kind of started off, but the third module really starts to focus on why the Americans were not satisfied with what they had. So as students read chapters 5 and 6, they begin to understand what was Western expansion. Why did these people believe that they needed to move out west? Why did they believe that they had that God-given right? And that's where they get into the whole manifest destiny topic. Where the students in this course, will discuss and analyze primary sources such as the picture below, and identify some of the major themes that they see, in understanding why these Americans thought it was their right to do what they did, and that was, essentially take over land that was already occupied by Native Americans for their own benefit, despite what the consequences were for the Native Americans. Similar to the last module, I included a Quizlet, which consists of a lot of major vocabulary that they will need to be familiar with to understand everything that's going on in this module. And I also included one of my favorite stories, which was the Donner Party, about a family or of like 40 people from like Indiana, I think, and they take wagons and they head out to Colorado and they end up getting stuck up in the mountains during a huge snowstorm where they have to result in cannibalism. So that was just another one of those little gold nugget stories that comes out of Western expansion that I thought that it was important to kind of include, just to kind of give students a little bit more detail of important stories that they might have otherwise not learn about as much in depth um, through just reading textbooks. So I really thank you for taking this time to listen to me and to get a little insight on what my course would be like. And I hope that that you enjoy this course. And good luck.